gentlemen, thank you very much for being here tonight. My name is Peter Bishop. I'm the Director of Economic Development for the City of Burlington, and you are here to see the presentation, some of the results from the American Institute of Architects Sustainable Design Assessment team that has been working diligently over the last 3 days to develop a vision and ideas for the future of the former Western Electric and Tar Heel Army missile plant. This was a grant that the City of Burlington received from the American Institute of Architects to do this work. The team's been working very hard over the last few days. I'm very glad to see many familiar faces from some of our earlier events that we had on Wednesday. On that day, we did 2 community input sessions, one in the morning and one in the evening. We also did some guided tours later that day, and also had a group of stakeholder focus groups to get all with the intent of getting a lot of input on what the future of this property could be. With that, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, and also a special thank you to our elected officials at both the county and city, state and federal levels that have been engaged with this process and that are here again tonight. Certainly want to thank the AIA S.D.A.T team and S.D.A.T staff for all the hard work they've been putting in. They've been going from about 7 in the morning till 10, 11 at night each of these days. They've been outside, sweaty, inside these buildings, getting their hands dirty, and then also in their shelter room working together to come up with all these plans and ideas. So a lot of folks have put in a lot of hard work to get to this point, and we have a lot of work to go to make this project and some of the projects that you're going to hear about tonight a reality. So with that, I wanted to introduce the AIA S.D.A.T team leader for the Burlington project, Mr. Tom Liebel, and he is going to get started on our presentation. So thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much. Great to be here. We had a really great time. We really, I really appreciate, to echo Peter's comments, the great community participation we had here. A lot of people came out, a lot of people spoke their minds. That was really, really great to hear. There's nothing worse than showing up, ready to do some good work, and there's no one there to kind of respond to that. So it's great everyone came out. And once again, I've acknowledged the great work of our team. Dominic Wicker, who's our economic development guy. We've got Terry Ammons, who's an architect doing some design conceptualizations. We got Terry DeWitt over here, who did a lot of our renderings. We've got Chris Harrell over here, who's a brownfields guy. They're all going to talk about their parts here. They've all got some ideas about this. And we're going to take roughly an hour here or so, I hope, to kind of walk through the ideas. I want to make sure we have plenty of time to answer questions. We got a lot of stuff to cover here. There's a lot more that we have thought about that we didn't have time to draw or think about, and even more than that will all be captured in the final report we issue out of this. But this is sort of a first sketch after about a solid day and a half of just pushing through, crunching numbers, coming up with design concepts. And with that, I want to get to it. So, I know a lot of folks came out for the site tour. A lot of you may not have gotten to get through some of the other buildings here, so just some of the ideas. Here's what we have in some of the areas here. Just really cool spaces that you would never know existed if you didn't get a chance to walk through there. Just really incredible spaces that are all in all, I think our general summation of walking through the site is it's in far better shape than we would have expected it to be for having been empty for 2, 3 decades. It really has, it's not bad. It really isn't. Even, there's some interesting graffiti left over in there. That's pretty cool. I mean, even the areas that need some love still are pretty awesome. So what I want to do is kind of walk through first kind of the history of the site. I know we all know it, but it certainly gave us some clues about how the site grew over time and what that might mean for how we treat it. So for those of you who know, here's our site in question. First thing, 1928 was the first building built here. It was about a 50,000 square foot mill. It's called Building 2 right now. It was built for the A.M. Johnson Rayon Company. That was the first spot on the site, as well as also the water towers built at that time. After that, a couple years later, they built out more and more. They built out building number 3, which is about an additional 60,000 square feet of space. And then this was kind of built in the later 30s too, on the side there. It's proximal enough, and Western Electric used it for a while as well, that it might be something that, while it's not part of our site study right now, we thought could be something into the future here. Then during the war effort, Actually, in the 30s, the Rayon Company went bankrupt. And the mill was empty for a while. During the war effort, the government tried to identify mills that could be repurposed for the war effort. And then Fairchild Engine and Airplane Corporation came in here, built a little tiny band right here, and made a big band right here, totaling another 110,000 square feet, plus a lot of the boiler house and all that up here. Well, one of the things we noticed as you work your way through the site from the 1928 to the 1930 to the 1943 building is they get bigger, they get taller, the column grid spread out a little bit more there. So that starts to give us clues about what might want to go there. We'll get to that in a minute. So this is kind of some of the spaces you see here when they're building airplanes here. The AT-21 twin engine trainer here was built here. That's a shot from back in the day, what it looked like in there. You can sort of see these great, tall bay spaces, lots of natural light coming through here. And that's one of the planes that they built. Look kind of cute, actually. And what we also know was right down the road there, they used to build airplanes there. So what do you need if you have an airplane? You actually need an airport. You need a runway. So right down to the south and east of the site is where the runway was for the group here. And so this is the plant up here, and this is the runway that's right over there. And what a lot of you might not know, or maybe you do, but there's a great tradition here in Burlington of drag racing. All started out on that abandoned airway strip. Once they got away from airplanes and into making avionics, that the strip that runs right down there was used as one of the early drag strips here. And that actually started a lot of the car culture you find in Burlington to this day. Kind of can tie back directly to this site right here. 1951-52, that's after the war effort. Western Electric took over. They started making missile control systems, things like that. You start to get a couple buildings built here. Once again, another 150,000 square feet of space, roughly. You got Nike 1 here. You got kind of a big shed building over here and a couple buildings over here. So all that was built. And then another half decade later, you start seeing things like this. This is Nike 1. This is some of the incredible devices that they made here when they're doing the guidance control for the Nike missile here. But you see, what you see today is a closed up abandoned building. All the windows have been boarded up. All the loading docks have been bricked up. But you sort of see these are all openings along here. This is all glass along here. You could really see what that building could become if you just kind of brought it back to the way it used to be. And more shots from here too. You had trains coming into the site here or hauling gear around. There's the radio tower to this day is still there. And in 1959, they built out yet more. They built another building over here. They built Nike 2, which is the really tallest building on the site here. It's 100,000 square feet by itself. It's a really, really big building. And that sort of started to build the site out. And then eventually, over time, more of the shots here. Here's actually some of the Nike missile gear that was made here. Here, actually, this is shot from 1960. There's a lot of folks in town here. They talk so fondly about, their father, their grandmother worked there. These were the leaders who worked on the site at the time. So I'm sure a lot of these are your grandparents here at this time. Was kind of the leadership on the site here from about 1960. By the 1970s, built some more spaces here. Western Electric, they were starting to build not just missile parts, but speakerphone pieces, things like that. And you also have, in the early 1980s, they built this big block over here. And here's what we have today. Here's the site, kind of colored out here. But you see, for as much square footage there is, there's lots of open space in between. And that's really great to see, because if a factory site is packed too tight, there's not enough breathing room, there's not enough room to circulate around, there's not really opportunities to get daylight into the spaces here. This is a really nice, modest scale to the site here. And one of the things we were all taken by is when you actually walk into the large plaza areas, the scale still has very much a human scale to it, despite the fact being, hundreds of thousands of square feet of space there. It doesn't feel too overwhelming. So we think there's a lot of great opportunities to make a really great place to come and visit here. So one of the things, this is a sustainable design assessment team. We want to talk about sustainable design. It's one of the core principles about why we're here. However, I'm going to cover this really, really quickly, because in the end, it's something we would do on this project no matter what, but it's really not that important to how we're going to redevelop the site here. So one of the things to consider to begin with is the recycling in an old building is inherently sustainable. It's inherently green. Carlo Elefante, who's actually the current president of AIA, was quoted years ago as saying the greenest building is one that's already been built. And that's absolutely true. Both because they're already integrated in the community, but also the idea of avoided impact. It's not just the fact that we've already expended the energy to build the buildings there, but by reclaiming that building once it's been abandoned, you're avoiding the additional environmental impact of building a new building if you can find a new purpose to fit in the old building. And we'll do things like, sure, solar panels on the roof. You know, it's an important and sustainable thing to do, but I would also challenge folks to, okay, solar panels on the roof, easy to do, it's done all the time now. We could also do something even sassier with solar canopy on. If you're in the parking areas, do something a little artful there. But on top of that, let's try to challenge you to say, let's do something really cool with solar and make it an art piece out of it. All uses of solar energy, but can you imagine that walking down one of those open areas here and have this really cool interactive environment here. Same thing, green roofs. We do them all the time. It's the best way to achieve stormwater compliance. It also provides some insulative value on the roof. It reduces urban heat island effect. They're done all the time. The roofs here can support that. And then also, but in addition to doing that, let's talk about maybe fire remediation somehow and talk a little bit, Chris talked a little about that. That, you know, actually using plantings on the site to help heal the environmental contamination. Let's think a little bigger here than just merely making it greener. You know, same thing, you know, water reclamation, a big thing about sustainability. We could really put some nice new big shiny galvanized tanks on the site, capture the rainwater, use it to irrigate. It's a thing you would do no matter what. But on top of that, we got a really big tank on site anyway. So maybe we could activate the existing water tower and really make something out of it and pump water up there and use that to irrigate and actually provide function back to the pre-existing, you know, structure that's here now. It's also a great signage opportunity when we renovate the site here to have that labeled, branded. So, and let's talk sustainability. Going back to this picture, in addition to being kind of a cool historic photograph of old airplanes, let's talk about sustainable design principles. What do you have here? You've got natural daylight. You know, there are no lights on in here. This is all sunlight that's coming through the light monitors, through all the lights on the windows on the sidewalls here. Natural ventilation. You know, these buildings were built without air conditioning. It was a factory. But you could open it up and allow natural breezes to flow through. Warm air would rise up. That's an inherently sustainable way to design. We work hard these days to design new buildings for natural ventilation, for daylighting strategies. This is already here. All I have to do is kind of undo all the renovations from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, open the building back up to be designed to act the way it originally was designed to act. So, getting actually to the interesting part of it, there's three aspects of sustainability. There's environmental sustainability, reducing the impact of the built environment and our buildings on the natural world. There's economic sustainability, designing in a way that reduces the cost to operate a building so you can afford to operate it. Those are two very easily understood things to consider. Social sustainability is the third part that's really important. It talks about how do you build community? How do you build a supportive environment? You can design the greenest building in the world, but if no one wants to hang out in it because it's unpleasant or it's remote or it makes you not want to be there or it isolates you from it, it's a failure as a building if you can't occupy it, if you don't want to be there. So social sustainability and intentionally creating community is that third leg of sustainable design. So let's talk about a couple things here. One of the things I always look at, sort of basic metrics, looking at community. So this is a map of housing costs. One of the primary metrics of housing affordability is if you spend less than 30% of your income on housing, that's deemed to be affordable. And this map here, yellow's good, less than 30%. You know, blue is bad, more than 30% for the area median income. What does that tell you? We're in in Burlington here. The west side of town, as we all know, is the more affluent part of town. Rents are higher over there. And this area here is, you know, right in the midst of area that's deemed to be affordable. However, there is a second metric that talks about the cost of housing and transportation. And if the same metric is if you spend more than 45% of your income on housing and transportation, it's not just where you live, but how you get back and forth to work, that's deemed to be unaffordable too. And when you look at that map, all of a sudden, a lot of areas that are affordable for rent are not affordable once you factor in the cost to drive, to get around to work, to get to school. So one of the things we want to talk about is you've got a bus system that started. That's great. Let's do more of that. You have a greenways master plan to encourage people to walk, take their bikes. Everything you can do to reduce the cost of driving around will help drive this down. And for this census tract here, said 45% is the magic number. We're at 50, so it's close. So, it's possible to make this area right here, which is right adjacent to the areas that are affordable all the way around, this could be affordable as well. We want to make sure we try and encourage that. Other things to talk about too, from the sustainability front, not going to have a huge impact to our conversation today, but the idea of greenhouse gases. One of the things we want to do is reduce the emission of greenhouse gas emissions, a lot of which come from driving around, from automobiles. And what's interesting, if you look at it, is in this case, light is good, dark is bad in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And what you'll see is when you're downtown, there are fewer tons of greenhouse gases emitted per acre. However, when you get to households, what you see is that even though you might not be emitting much in the way of greenhouse gases out here, when you're driving around so much, once again, the per capita or per household emission of greenhouse gases is really high. Once again, the more we can eliminate the need for single transportation, the more we can reduce the environmental impact of the way we live. Other thing to look at here too is the social vulnerability index, easy for me to say, and looking at the county in general here. And what you see is, it's interesting, is that Haw River, Burlington, what we're looking at is there is a fairly significant social vulnerability here. A little less so as you head west over here, heading over towards Greensboro, but it's something we want to be cognizant of. So how can our site, which is kind of in the midst of this over here, help to heal, help to create a more supportive environment for the community and help increase the social interaction and support systems that the community clearly needs. This is one of the things I found really surprising. There's a thing called Walk Score that talks about how pedestrian friendly your community is. How easy is it to walk around the corner to get a bite to eat, to go to the grocery, to find a bank, to go to school. It's a score from 0 to 100. 90 to 100 is like a walker's paradise, and there's everything there. I would have bet the score would have been much lower than 58, somewhat walkable. But in this site here, there's more there than you think. That's a really good thing. That's a clue that with a couple of key design insertions, you can make it even more pedestrian friendly. You can make it more easy to walk there. There's actually a great opportunity to really bump that walk score up with a couple of minor tweaks. Other interesting thing, though, about commuting details, and this is going to be running counter to, it could be a really nice walkable community. Here's some simple stats on a commute detail. Living, if you were to sort of be on the site here to zip to downtown Burlington, to go from our site to the heart of downtown, takes about 5 minutes to drive, 7 minutes during rush hour. So that's, you got a 2-hour rush hour impact here, so you guys are really lucky. But then, to ride your bike over there, it's about 14 minutes. To walk, 40 minutes. 53 minutes to take a bus there. So we want to encourage public transportation. You got to somehow split that difference to make it, if you drive there in 5 minutes, but it takes 53 minutes to travel the same distance, that's a disincentive to take the bus. So, one of the things I want to talk about now, and we're going to get into some of the details here, is ultimately, this is a very complex project. A lot of moving pieces to it. It's a very big site. Who are the players and what are the roles to make this happen? Well, first of all, we've got the community. Residents in the area are really critical to this. This is your home. We also need you to step up, advocate, be a force for change in the neighborhood. We also have government. Government has a strong role to play here. In terms of support of this, the integration of infrastructure improvements here, one of the things that's important to recognize is we want to ask each of these players to step up and do what's expected of them and not something else. We don't want the government to come in and pay for it all. So number one, it's not appropriate to do it. Number two, it's not going to happen. So instead, let's talk about other partners like nonprofits and institutions. So we have nonprofit organizations, we have institutions, we have Cone Health, we have Alamance Community College, we have Elon, we have a bunch of other folks here who could play a very positive role by agreeing to participate in the redevelopment of this, both to help fund it in some ways, but also show community support for this endeavor. And in the end, we also think the private sector has a role to play here. Donna's going to talk a lot about kind of how you finance this. Clearly, you know, there are opportunities to have folks use this as a commercial activity. And with that, I think I'm going to hand this over to Chris and talk about the site.
Right, hello, I'm Chris Harrell. Thank you all for coming out. First of all, I specialize in brownfield redevelopment, and I wanted to go real quickly just to make sure that term is something that is not foreign to everyone as you leave tonight. So a brownfield, as a Chris definition up there, is a little short one. We have a little bit longer one from the feds, and each state defines it a little differently in their statutes. So essentially, it's an underutilized property that has either perceived or actual presence of contamination that inhibits its redevelopment. That's kind of boiling it down. The key there, I just want to point in, is perceived. It may or may not have contamination, but it's still holding it back. So I wanted to let you know that in a brownfield definition, like you can imagine some, like an old abandoned gas station or a dry cleaner that's sitting there. You've probably seen those as you drive around town from time to time. But also we have larger ones, old industrial facilities. So the feds define it, and they add a little, you know, as the feds would like to do, they add a little, certainly with certain legal exclusions and additions, the term brownfield site means yada yada, similar thing. Those legal exclusions may or may not include this site. So it is going to depend on determinations by the feds themselves, if they would call this a brownfield or not. But for my purposes, I am, because it fits my definition. How about that? All right, there's the Fed one. I'm not going to drill in there. You don't have to read it all. It's tiny, tiny. It's the small print. But I did want to give you, down in there is a little red part where the president can say it's not a brownfield, or it is a brownfield, even when they say it isn't under their own definition. So, you know, the feds do what they do. The good part is they're there to help. And that is true, and I'll get to that in a moment. So in the end, what is this site's situation? Is it a brownfield, is it not? I'm going to say so because it meets my definition. Now, is it contaminated? Yep. But this is not uncommon. These sites I've worked on around, there's a Naval Air Warfare Center in Indianapolis I worked on quite a bit. 122 acres. They did not make planes there before. That was kind of neat. And this one, they actually maintained tanks at one time too. So a lot of cool uses in this one. Can it be redeveloped? Absolutely. Some parts of the site might be more difficult than others, and I'll get to that in a second, and we'll kind of drill into the site itself. But I enjoyed the picture there because this is from one of the panels from the systems from the Nike missiles that they built at the site, and they had an out of action button. So that's kind of where our site stands right now, if you will. The Army and state are working on a solution for the contamination issues. So I did want to go through that. The responsible party for majority of the contamination at the site is the U.S. Army, and they are working with the state remediation program manager to come up with a plan on the ongoing cleanup. And when I say ongoing, I'm going to explain where it has been in the last few years on that topic too. Certainly, I've seen worse sites than this, and you might think, oh, what? But no, really, I have. And certainly, it's not going to be easy, but we've taken these considerations into account as we've all worked together over the last several days, coming up with a staged plan on how to approach, how do you deal with a big property like this. So next, briefly, I just want to point out from some of the documentation, and there is quite a bit of it. I learned I was looking through documents for the last few days, and at one point I started thinking, oh, I thought I'd gotten to the bottom of what I needed to download. You know, there's a trove. And then I realized, and I think I looked at Peter and I said, Peter, yeah, I don't think I'm going to get all these downloaded. And he had nice, pretty fast internet set up for us, and I was like, I don't think I'm going to get there. So I kind of, from that point, picked and choose what I was actually going to try to digest to talk to you guys this evening. But the red areas are the areas of known impact and source areas from, this was, the date on the document way down there says like 94, but it was updated through, I think this was a 2004 document, somewhere around in there. But those areas, and you see the blue, that's a really bad Chris is not graphically inclined. So I tried to draw in there a little bit of where the plume kind of goes to the northwest direction. And so that is a very basic summary of where the hot spots were. And they've done significant cleanup over the years, but there is still a plume in the groundwater going that way. What is a plume? It's just contamination that has gotten into the groundwater and moves along. So,
Can you give us perspective as to what roads are where?
Sure.
It's kind of hard.
yeah, it's not the best, and it's also kind of squished. The screen squishes it a little bit. So that's north up there. And as we look at the site,
So that's
This
where
is-
it's going?
yeah.
Okay.
So, and then that's kind of the old entrance.
Sorry.
So yeah, the northwest is there's a street just north of the property and residential homes on that side, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So as we go through it, digging through all this trove of information, in 1988, the reports kind of claimed there's no off-site contamination presumed, and there's no reason to worry about it. The record indicates that also a desire to end investigation in the 90s. I presume that means that not to prevent redevelopment. They really wanted to see the site redeveloped 20-something, 30 years ago, right? Interesting, as they'd even added in the record, it shows that people had tried to discourage further review of the site environmentally. Where I'm going is they're still working on cleanup now, 30-something years later. Why is that? There were certain forces saying, oh, it's good, it's fine, don't worry about it. Well, in the brownfield world, you have to deal with your issues so you can get to the point of ready finance and being able to do the great things that we want to do. So when you look at that, it even stays in there. Somebody, a representative at one time in the 90s was saying, oh, we need to quit doing this environmental investigation. It's like, quote unquote, fighting windmills. Well, if we had fought those windmills now, we might have a site redeveloped. So just saying. All right, next we move on to the now time, getting closer to now. This was in the 2000s. This is part of the remediation process on site. I found some pictures of the actual remediation taking place. And it shows the 3 different types. One type they even tried in 2004 to 2006, bioremediation. They were saying, hey, let's try a pilot. Let's see if we can do this through the Army. And they used emulsified oil, soybean oil, to see how that worked. It didn't quite work out as well as they hoped, but it did work. It broke down the products, but they broke down into even worse and more carcinogenic daughter products. So then they put more in there to get rid of those. But that process continues to work as it always does. So didn't quite work out as well, but they tried. Significant amounts. So these groundwater extraction pump and treat went on from 99 to 2013. That's quite a long time. So a significant amount was pumped and treated through that. Next, I'm just going to show you in terms of the site. These lovely panoramic pictures are cool, but sometimes they distort things. But you can kind of see the little red box. That's where an old hazardous waste containment area was. So they would store things there from everything I've read in the record. I didn't work at the site, so you may know better, and after this conversation, if you do, let me know, because we can pass that along. Every bit of information about this stuff helps the future cleanup, trust me. But there were several areas that were impacted as source areas, but I showed you those in the red before. But that was the one, the big nasty one. And so that's the one they focused on as being the source that's going to the northwest. Just to provide you a little more, these are some snaps. They have sampled in the little creek that runs near the site. They've also sampled the on-site. That's all some of the locations that they had monitoring wells. So wanted to just give you a little idea of what was going on. Most recently, and as the status of now, I want to get to there, is in May of 2017, a great acronym, American Toxic Substances Disease Registry, the ATSDR, works with Department of Health and Human Services in North Carolina. They put together a health consultation, essentially a risk assessment of the impacts at the site and how that may or may not be affecting those off-site. And that was based on information in the record, that big giant trove of data. And they reviewed it, sent a letter, and providing that they said we can't say because there's not enough data. So Army, we need to go get more data. Where I'm going is, you may or may not have received, if you lived northwest of the site, you may have received a letter recently in the last month or two saying, hey, we'd like to sample some indoor air vapor intrusion in your house. That is apparently occurring just as I started calling, asking questions to try to determine the status of the property. This has come to light. So, to not belabor it anymore, I just wanted to kind of run through the status, so they are going to seek additional information to find out. Next, what is vapor intrusion? What is it they're worried about or thinking about? It's essentially when it goes in the groundwater, volatile organic compounds can travel great distances sometimes, you don't know, and then they can come back up and volatilize into a home. Now, these are typically solvents, volatile organic compounds. The names of them are big and long, but they are shortened to TCE or PCE. Those are the ones they're concerned with here. And those are generally used for parts cleaner. That's what they use for at this site. I met a gentleman. He walked me through the site. It was really valuable in information. Great guy. And Richard was his name. And he showed me where in the location of the site where they actually use the solvents. And he had personally used them. So he was telling me about it. So that was a real special treat to meet him and some other of you at the meeting the other day. So that's what it is. When they do the sampling, which I've participated in Indianapolis and Louisville and other places, these are the type of canisters. They're just little cylinders. They sit there. They don't use power or anything. They just suck in air over time, maybe a day to a week, and then they take them and send them away. That's it. So that's really all that has to happen if you let them agree to let them sample in your air to make sure it's safe enough. So that's it. The one on the right is a soil gas. So they're checking it in the ground to see if soil gas vapors are coming out of the ground. So if solutions, I just wanted to point out, if they do find it's occurring, it's typically not that difficult to mitigate the vapors. So you may have seen one of these on the side of a building before. That's typically thought of as a radon system, but it works similarly. So it would extract the vapors from a basement or a subslab. And that's one of the most common mitigation techniques they use. There are others as well as passive ones. But I don't want to get buried in there, but I did want to let people know it's not that complicated on residential use to usually deal with this.
If they find those at the houses, is the Army going to pay for them?
Typically, yes. I won't speak for the Army, they might shoot me. But, but I would say, I have to couch it that way, but I would, in most cases, the responsible party does do that, yes. I would say I haven't found one where they didn't. So I'm going to just say, I just wanted to give a snapshot of what it is. The big key is this concern is all the time, all over the country, on brownfield properties I've worked on here and there. It is definitely surmountable, and the data I've seen is definitely not the type of site I've seen in other places. From the data I have seen, it's not a scary site in that regard.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out this evening. It's nice to see a lot of faces that we've seen in the last couple of days and participating in the process. My name is Terry Ammons. As Tom said, I'm an architect. I have my office in Petersburg, Virginia, but I'm doing quite a bit of work throughout North Carolina and a pretty broad range of places. And we do a lot of redevelopment of historic sites, industrial sites, and strategic planning for those areas. And what we want to talk about a little bit tonight, we've been listening to you guys, we've been talking about what we've heard in these meetings, because it's very important for us to understand what you all feel about this property, why you care about it, why you want to see something happen here. So as we're thinking and looking at options and ideas, we can really be taking that into consideration. We want our planning to reflect the values that you all have brought as a community to this process. And so Tom's also talked a little bit about some of the complications of this. You all know this is a huge property. It's a property that's kind of hard to get a handle on quickly. It's complicated, it's lots of different buildings, sort of some things it feels like it's half being demolished while some of it's falling down. And but the thing is, many of you have relatives, have friends, family, the number of people who know somebody who worked here, whose lives were affected by this plant, really encompasses a large part of the community. And so this plant means a lot to the community, and we see that and we understand that. That's a big part of what we heard from you. So as we were thinking about the ideas that were going to drive how we proceeded with thinking about a process for design on this property, I'm going to go through with you a few of the things that we felt were the most important ideas. And these things are driving the solutions that we're going to present. And part of what we're looking at too, and we talked about this earlier with some of our focus groups, is that we're interested in looking at solutions, but also at processes that can be put in place to really help move this project forward. It's a large project. It doesn't happen in one fell swoop. And as Tom said earlier, it involves a lot of different partners generally. These projects really have to bring a lot of resources to the table. And because of that too, it really needs the community behind it over a length of time to try to make good things happen there. But there are solutions to starting to move forward now. And we want to talk to you a little bit about how we see that process. So the first thing is we really felt like there needs to be a stronger connection to downtown and the rest of the city. The property, is walled off already, so it's a little bit of an island in the middle of residential areas and neighborhoods. So finding ways to sort of open it up, make it connected are really important. You all have a new greenways plan and a new sidewalk plan, both of which are about connectivity. So we really felt like what we wanted to look at was how can we tie this project into what's, the planning that's going on right now for connecting the city, making a more livable place. We heard a lot about family resources and opportunities that don't exist in this area right now. And so we really felt like that's something we should keep in mind as we think about uses and the short and long-term development of the property. We see an opportunity here also for this property and the development to become a center for community health and wellness programs. We heard in the meetings about the need for medical care facilities. Outpatient care facilities now are the big thing. You don't always go to the emergency room now. A lot of your hospitals, they've got their little version of a doc in the box over here where you can go get their emergency treatment or their outpatient treatment. And so we started thinking about some of the ideas for bringing those kind of services into the project also. Obviously, this is a huge site, and so thinking about development here as an incremental thing or as a phased project is something that's really important because it not only breaks the burden of some of the pieces of the project down into manageable components, but it also really allows a variety of people and entities and organizations and civic groups and government agencies and things to come together and figure out the best way to partner on a variety of different pieces of the project that all have different dimensions to them, that all have different needs. We really saw it also as an opportunity to concentrate some community and regional resources in this part of town. You actually have quite a few county, city resources that are kind of scattered through this area, but you don't have a sense of a sort of central place to go, kind of an orienting place. And all of this also then goes to attract future residents and improve the lives of the existing residents around the Western Electric plant. We're going to talk a little bit about starting with some low-hanging fruit. What are some achievable short-term ways that you guys as a community can take this project on, can bring all these players together and start talking about steps that you can take. I know you want to see something, so we're going to get into some pictures in just a second. But one of the other things we did before we really started getting into how might this happen, a lot of this came from the meetings too. It came from input from you guys, and then we would sit with that input, talk to each other about what kind of ideas kept coming up, what kind of ideas made sense. We started to develop our thoughts on possible uses that could happen on the site. So we could start to map uses to buildings or to portions of the site and development that made sense. We started talking about Children's Museum and Activity Center, Cold War Museum, Wellness Center, clinic, outpatient facilities, recreation facilities, education, events and meeting spaces, new local markets, whether it's a farmer and makers market, opportunities there to bring market into the neighborhoods. Small business incubation and graduation. Start your small business there, have a place to move as you grow, and really continue the development of your business before you head back out into the city, find your permanent location. Technology incubation. We're in a region here with many universities and tech companies, and this is an ongoing thing, and we've got kind of unique buildings here that may lend themselves to technology uses. We thought it was important that the city have a presence on site, maybe city agency offices, small police precinct, that the city can play a role in a very simple way by just being an occupant and a participant in development, without just saying the city has to fund this big thing. Art and maker space. Heard a lot of talk about the desire to see the arts here be supported by something that's happening here. Art and maker space is kind of flexible and really works well in the kind of big open space buildings we have here. And the main thing that really kind of overlays everything is that all of these ideas about functions and uses really have to sort of remain flexible right now, because these projects don't happen overnight. It's going to take years to develop a project like this. It's going to happen in pieces probably, and we'll get into that in a moment. But it needs to be able to respond over time to whatever new needs and situations the community feels would really work here. So that flexibility of development is important. So we first started looking at the connectivity issues. And our site, you can see, is right here. This is the intersection of Church and Graham Hoopdale right here. We're very close to the Greenway bike path in the Greenways plan that you've just done, and we're very close to this phase 2 piece of the Greenway. So our site's sitting just a couple of blocks from each of those. Seems like a pretty easy opportunity to try to tie it in right now, so that as you develop these greenways and these connections, this site becomes part of it. And then with some focus soon on the development of the Church Street corridor, really, a lot of people talked about the corridor really not being the most inviting way to get out to this site. It's all fast food and all small businesses. Well, the sidewalks are intermittent and it's really hard to walk. So these connectivity ideas are going to be important in connecting this property to the rest of the community and to downtown. So the other places where you're investing in the community, you can see some return here also. So I talked a little bit about this idea of a phased or a project that happens in pieces. What we wanted to do is say, what's a phase 1 that's doable? How do you keep from being deterred by the idea of 800,000 square feet? Tom has told us many times, you don't need 800,000 square feet of anything. You don't need 750,000 square feet of anything. So, how do we look at this complex and start making some really simple decisions, that start to utilize the building, utilize the space, change the image of it? The first thing, the front yard. So, we've got this big front yard on this property. It's kind of unkempt right now, but it's a front yard. It's green space. Start doing maintenance on it. Start keeping that space looking good. Start making it be a really positive part of the streetscape in the area. And it changes the way people start to think about the potential of the site. Children's Museum and Activity Center. This 1970s piece of building here, pretty easy renovation. And so you could start to, and none of these are set in stone, you could put a medical office there. There are any number of things that fit the needs that we've talked about that could go in this location. But to start to bring activity to the site, to bring people, your families, a place to start going and having those activities. This courtyard where we met the other day, very easily be sort of cleaned up and turned into an event space that can be managed and controlled when you need to, and you can have special events there, you know, small concerts there, throw a big movie screen up in the summertime and show outdoor movies. And by reworking the existing parking and the entry here, you really can create good access to this. You've controlled a portion of the site, and you haven't had to deal with all of the mess that's behind it right away. So you can really get started with this. When you go down Graham Hopedale Road and you look at this property, you know, it can look like a fully renovated and restored property pretty quickly by doing some of these first steps. So phase 2, and this is an image, you know, just you can see the prominence of that front building. As a children's museum, as a new clinic, it starts to really project the potential of development here. Phase 2 extends that idea with the development of a health and wellness clinic area. We're not programming this right now, but as a focus for development, it's an opportunity to partner with other healthcare entities in the region and the community to help make this project happen. Over here, I have to, you know, this is a little bit of a favorite. I do own a brewery also in Brew Beer. So, you know, we've got this cool building sitting over there that's also part of the front of the property, the old boiler plant, or the power plant. There are plenty of examples of where those have been turned into breweries, brew houses, and really cool places to go eat and drink. And we've got an opportunity here too to create some parking here with public access. And we now have the whole front of the facility, for the most part, cleaned up and occupied and being used. Now, the red rectangle down here, that's the Nike missile plant number 1, not missile plant, Nike number 1. Nike number 1 is a pretty good building from a development standpoint, and in a few minutes, Dominic's going to talk a little bit about some development scenarios for that building. It's kind of, can easily be a standalone development. So, but it could happen at this time, number 2. And a couple other things there. There's this little building back here, a portion of building at the end of this courtyard. When everybody took the tour the other day, everybody that walked in there said, wouldn't this be a cool restaurant? It's got a little wall space in there called the Crow's Nest. Well, that could be used right now as a temporary exhibit space. And you could do rotating exhibits, receptions in there. It's a small area to be able to kind of clean up, tidy up, and separate from the rest of the facility. And it's connected to this courtyard right here where you could do events also. As I said, the parking expands a little bit at this stage. In conjunction with this, coffee shop, cafe, you know, you could start to look at support businesses that go along with the fact that people are coming to a museum, they're coming to the healthcare facilities, they're going to grab some coffee, they're going to grab a little bit of lunch while they're there. So the next phase, phase 3, well, this is in phase 2, you can see just by cleaning up that courtyard and the entranceway and the parking, you start to have a pretty inviting space and building here. And again, there's really big challenges we haven't had to deal with yet. So, you know, we're moving you through step by step in a way that you can kind of, you know, grasp how to turn this whole facility around, but not all at once. That's the power plant there, so, you know, pretty cool brewery space if you ask me. I'd love to have mine there, but I already have one, so.
Expansion.
Expansion, yes, we're not franchising. Phase 3, so phase 3 is where we start to take on some of the big buildings, and we need more infrastructure on site, more circulation, more parking, all those things that go along with increased development and increased occupation, so we got a lot of people on site. Phase 3 is the purple here, and these are pretty much big open spaces inside, and really what we saw going there It was a combination of things. So the expansion of the health and wellness can include recreation facilities, whether it's indoor soccer fields, tennis courts. I don't know if you're into pickleball down here. It seems to be what people are talking about back home. But facilities that can be regional draws as well as local and community assets from a recreational standpoint. The building here, which is a corrugated metal building that some of you saw the other night, that building is perfect size to be indoor parking. You just open it up and you drive 2 drive aisles inside and you've got parking right there, and you didn't have to build a structure. And that parking can serve this new development and this new development here, while your parking out here is still serving your development along the face of the property here. So we're also looking here at this point at starting to think about you'd have a connection through this building that connects these 2 open areas that we're calling plazas right now. So that down the road we're starting to create a way for you to move around this property and for different areas to be connected internally. There's also an opportunity down here, because we have a piece of property right here that isn't built, to have a connection directly off of Church Street too. So we're increasing access and varying the access to the property so different functions in different areas don't overlap and have sort of traffic problems on the site. And you can see these spaces inside these buildings are huge. You can easily fit multiple recreational fields inside these buildings. So now Phase 4. Phase 4 is really concentrated back in the back of the property. They're these smaller open buildings, the Quonset hut building right here, a little courtyard here, and these kind of open spaces around them. We see Phase 4 really being sort of artist maker space. It's an area that might need more cleaning up and more remediation in that portion of the site, so we pushed it back in the phasing a little bit to give us time to be able to sort of get there and do the things that we need to clear the way so development of those is easy. This could be a public sort of sculpture court where the artists that have their studios here have their stuff out there. It's open to the public. You can go see what they're working on and watch their process. So that's Phase 4. Public gallery space could be in the Quonset hut. And at this point, we can start thinking about this large open space over here, too, as a large event space. And that's a big space. You could have a big concert there and put hundreds of people in there. You could have small stage, big stage. It's really pretty flexible right now. We're saying, I don't know if any of you have been to New York or been to a park or something in New York, but there are these things called Shake Shacks. And no one understands why they do so well, but they're just always lines around the block to get hamburgers and shakes, and you can get a glass of wine with your hamburger. Starting to introduce, something like that, a little iconic, kind of food service in that plaza. So a way to do events, a way to have food service there. So you're starting to create the infrastructure for doing the events. And so you can see it's got a nice scale to it. This would be your brewery down here on the end, and you'd have a beer garden off of the brewery, and you could walk back out, if an event was going on and you couldn't get into the brewery, just come on back out and get something out here in the plaza. It's a really kind of wonderful space for that, and these big sort of odd Cold War buildings are a really cool backdrop that give it character that most places don't have. So Phase 5 then is really kind of the biggest undertaking from a development standpoint in a way, and it's the big Nike 2 building back here. That building can sit there. It's not going anywhere. Nothing much is going to happen to it. So if you need 20 years to do the rest of this stuff, it's just going to be waiting for you right there. For development, it's a lot of square footage. It can be broken up all sorts of different ways. And so, in a way, we don't want to really prescribe that it has to be anything right now, because once you get to it, you may have a different idea than you do now about what you'd like to have there. This site might become a destination, and all of a sudden, that's really something that people are looking at and saying, well, I really want to do that. We got a university that wants to put a portion of their school there. We've got a lab that wants to go there. So, we're not prescribing right now every use for every building. We're giving you some suggestions on how this could work and how you could move this forward. You can see really these are the Quonset huts. Everybody loves the Quonset huts. They're there. And you have all these extensions to the plaza all around the Quonset hut. You'd be wandering around the artist studios if there was an event there. So you've really got a wonderful place to be, interacting with a wide range of things. So we also wanted to just take a kind of big picture look here. We've heard some people talk about a range of things. And so, if we just thought of this as part of the Greenway now and really connected green space to a place where we create a new anchor here at this intersection at Church, and that can really be a catalyst for starting to redevelop the neighborhood and really improve the assets that are available in this neighborhood, and thinking of this as a sort of center, Burlington Center East or something, however you want to think about that. But you start to brand it, you start to get green space in the facility. See your little sculpture garden here, more greenery, garden space. You could have native grass gardens in this open space, following the old railway tracks. There's so many ways to think about how you could take each of these spaces now and turn them into amenities for a much larger, more complex facility. There was talk of needing a transit center in this part of town. And so you've got a property right here. It's got some extra parking on it that could be overflow from the big facility here. And this transit center could be connected to your greenway and bike path. And then for kicks, we just threw your baseball field in down here. So let's say you built a new stadium. This could be a soccer field. We're not trying to push, baseball on you or anything, but what you get is the parking that's really kind of required for, all of this. It's about 400 parking spaces there. It's a perfect site for a really substantial facility that becomes a draw, a regional draw and certainly a local draw. It's connected very easily then with your transportation plans, with your greenway plan, and with your bike plan up above, right to the entrance to our site right here. So we really feel like there's some positive ways to move forward with this project, and without being sort of daunted by the size and scale. You just have to sort of look at it a little bit differently. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dominic, and he's going to talk about development and numbers and, make it exciting.
I'll try. So my name is Dominic Wicker. I'm a developer from Baltimore. I specialize in mostly multifamily, but I do a lot of work in adaptive reuse, especially with manufacturing industrial properties, repositioning them for a variety of uses: food halls, apartments, offices, etc. So as we were talking, obviously the vision here is big, and we're excited about that. And so I think what I sort of took on as my task here was to really start trying to, for the layman, and this might be a little bit complicated for some, but the idea was to sort of make a little bit of a sense of all these acronyms here. This is this alphabet soup that we, who are trying to sort of put something in the ground, deal with every day, particularly with a very challenging project like this. So all you see here are a bunch of different financial programs. There's low-income housing tax credits, new market tax credits, historic tax credits, pilots, 179Ds. So you get a flavor. So what I was going to do here is just sort of focus on a few that I thought would be sort of good candidates. By no means are these the only. And then what we were looking to do was to start to create a little bit of bones to some of the early phases that we were presented, and to start to see, hey, there's a path forward. We looked at the environmental, there's a path forward there, there's a path forward on the finances as well. Won't be easy, but it'll be there. So really, we look at sort of two things in my world. We've got sort of private sources, debt, bank equity, or bank lending, developer equity, public sources, and then you see a list here. And this is, let me just sort of skip on. So on the private sources, it's very simple. Really, it seems complicated, but really bank financing is your mortgage, and developer equity is your down payment, right? So it's the equity that I'm putting in as the developer, the landowner, You know, how am I basically showing that I have real skin in the game, I'm really going to stay here, and then can I find a lender who believes in me, believes in my project, and says, hey, I think that program is going to work, I believe that you're going to be able to pay your mortgage, and you know, we can have a deal. Sounds a lot easier than it is. On the public side, and it's really public is kind of a little bit of a misnomer, obviously this project has enormous benefits of historic tax credits. This is a federal and oftentimes state program, and here in North Carolina, you all are blessed with an incredibly powerful addition that many of us, including us in Maryland, just don't have. So what happens here, and it's been a long-standing program, very well understood by the marketplace, very well understood by all the different agencies that are involved. So it's sort of a three-step process. And at a very high level, the part one, this first step, is basically saying, hey, do I have a historic property? Does it qualify as historic? So you've already done that. Part two is basically saying, hey, feds, through your state agency, this project that I want to do, here's my plan. Is it going to be compliant with all your rules, your guidelines? They've got some crazy ideas. Sometimes they've got some things that they're really flexible on. Everything's a negotiation. Everything's a horse trade. But basically what you're doing at that part two level is you're just saying, this is what I want to do. Let's have a conversation. They come back and say, approved. The piece, and this is, everyone's very fortunate when you get there, is the part three, the third part. And then that is basically saying, hey, the plan that you approved, the plan I told you I was going to do, I did, so give me my money. And, again, it's a very well understood process. It's sort of pretty smooth. It's a lot of interaction between the developer, the state agency, and then the federal government, in this case, it's the Department of the Interior. But what happens here is that they give you, the feds, they give you 20% of your qualified expenditures. So they'll look at your, however much you're going to spend, they deduct a whole bunch of things, always more than you want, but they're going to, at the end of it, they're saying, you do all that, and we'll give you 20%. So as a rough number, if I had $1 million of expenditures, they're giving me back $200,000. It's just free money, really powerful incentive, really helps advance the project. I may not be able to use that. I may not have $200,000 of federal income tax need. So what I do, and this is where markets get really interesting, is that some big corporation somewhere, could be a bank, different companies around the nation, will come to you and say, I'll buy those credits from you. I have a tax liability, I want to buy those. They usually buy it at a discount, so that $200,000 that you just got might go for $180,000. But now that's real cash in your pocket. Now that's real cash for the developer to advance, and it also helps you with that down payment, gets the project going. Here, as we just talked about, the state has a similar program. They go to, I think it's 15%, and then it kicks in, there's sort of tiers at different levels. That's just more. Maryland, we've got basically half as much as you do. So I think, one takeaway, and I guess I was talking to Representative Ross about this, it's about to, well, not about to expire, but it's slated to expire within the next 5 years. So that is something that everyone, public, policyholder, anyone interested in the site, needs to make sure that that tool remains in place for the next 5 years, because this will take time. So let's move on to the next sort of kind of obvious source of sort of outside money. So new markets tax credits. And I have been to, and I could spend hours trying to understand them. Truthfully, we do them very, very rarely. They are incredibly complicated, incredibly inefficient, which means basically you put a lot of lawyers and consultants and you get very little, but it's another source of money. And again, there's a market for these credits that are out there. It is unlike the historic tax credits, where you can come in and say, if I do A, I get B. This is a very competitive process. So you have to sort of sell yourself to people who are holding these credits. About 35% of people get them. So it gives you a little bit of sense of energy, and so how you decide how to allocate your resources. But again, it's a real piece out there. kind of moving down, and this starts where the money really starts to get a little bit funny. On the public capital, big site, there's obviously a opportunity, maybe there's a role for public dollars of some kind. Usually that I see that for a site like this in form of infrastructure, extension of roads, greenway, park, whatever. But that's any dollars there that can advance the project, that make it easier to develop, are probably something that the public sources should have a conversation about, particularly if they're going to look to be doing it anyway around the city. And then finally, and again, this is just sort of a catch-all, just grants, right? I mean, we have a lot of foundation communities, for some of the uses we talked about, who, arts, children, wellness, there are more funders out there than stars in the sky sometimes. But getting them, finding an in, getting their resources, making it match up, that your program matches what they want, all out there. But it's a real source, and it really can help advance a project. So I've been here for 3 days. I can't claim to be an expert by any stretch, and so I really just tried to take as deep of a dive into trying to understand your market, so we could think about different program options and what might be feasible. Obviously, as I looked around, I looked at the data, took tours, you've got a lot of space for both for retail, some of these sort of pretty typical shopping centers, some along Church Ave, some elsewhere in the city. And you've even got, relatively new office space that's just vacant, and it seems like it has been. Rents are not very high, vacancy is pretty high. I think vacancy is probably in excess of 10%, but that probably there's some geographic diversity to that as well. But rents of $8, $10, modified gross, what does that mean? Basically that means I'm a tenant, I'm paying some expenses, taxes, insurance, utilities, the landlord's paying some also. So that's just a negotiation. But it's not a very big rent burden on a tenant. Good news for the tenant, sort of bad news for the landlord, and also makes things kind of difficult to justify from an investment standpoint. So this property here on the right, just to call it out, office building right downtown, 10,000 square feet, built I think in like the mid-late 90s. It's less than $10 a foot. I'd be challenged to figure out how to build it for that. Retail, more or less the same. Lots of big spaces available. Lots of, like I said, these sort of 60s, 70s style shopping centers, big field. Again, rents there are look pretty consistently in around the $5 to $7 range. So it's sort of the condition. So as we've kind of talked about, and these are really going to be themes again and again, from a developer's standpoint, how we would sort of look at it, how I would sort of look at it. Obviously, this is an enormous elephant, and you're going to bite it, take it one bite at a time. And so we're going to look at this in a phased way and figure out, how can you stretch your dollars, how can you stretch your resources. I don't love the term the city center, but this notion that this site, when you look at a bigger map, it really does fall pretty close, surrounded by lots of strengths, lots of great circulation opportunities, and this has a really chance to be something that the entire city and even adjacent cities and towns have ability to feed into and really create a little bit of like a public square type of feeling. I don't think, as I sit here now, based on what I just told you about the market, I think that the private sector is probably going to be skeptical initially. They're going to want to say, prove it, show me something. Show me that, how the farmers markets are working. Show me how your early galleries are working. Show me something and get me comfortable so that, in the next phase, I feel more confident. So I do think that at the early phases, you're going to have a heavy emphasis on those institutions that really want to do right by the city for participating in some meaningful way. Others out there who, again, we don't know yet, but a place that we can really create a sort of a beachhead of investment and strength, and then really build off of that. And so as that gets better, as the site presents itself better, then people feel more and more confident about, hey, this is just a regular, normal little transaction, and I want to invest in that. Multi-layered financing, I think we've talked about that. It's going to be a lot of different pieces, and I think there's no sort of single path. And I think at the end, you know, big site, lots of moving pieces. Obviously, you know, those who are working at the development on all sides, you know, are all going to have a level of sophistication. This isn't a, you know, scrape it, start over. You know, as we talked about from an environmental, from a design standpoint, there are levels of complexity here that would challenge the most sophisticated, most experienced ones of us. This would be I've got a lot of experience in this thing. This would be, you know, age me beyond, you know, beyond my already, you know, advanced years. So, I mean, I just say that because but it will be necessary and it will be a resource and it will get the job done. But that leadership is going to be required and that vision is going to be required. So then what we did here, kind of building off of what some of the things that Terry did, was we thought, let's just look at a couple quick case studies to sort of take a little bit of some of the tools, some of the vision, and see how they might play out and see, you know, kind of like prove to ourselves, prove to you that, hey, yes, there's, you know, we made a lot of assumptions, but we see a path forward. So what we wanted to kind of focus on was, let me see right here. So really I kind of looked at this area and here first. It's not exactly consistent with the phasing plan, but both of these two buildings are about 50,000 feet. And so we said, oh, you know, if I was going to do office space of about 50,000 feet, whether it's studio, institutional, healthcare, city, whatever, you know, let's look here for that. The next scenario that we're going to, well, I'll show you about was looking at some, you know, larger kind of health wellness piece throughout here. So kind of walk you through, maybe have a little bit more, make a little bit more sense, and we can certainly get into it more. So this was my, you know, really when I kind of had walked through Nike One, was it building 14, something like that. You know, really struck me as an, you know, it was an easy place to start. Good bones, great light. As Tom mentioned earlier, you've got these like, and I take terrible pictures compared to these guys. Tons of like opportunity to just open up the whole space up here. You've got these windows up at top. So it's a great contributing building and historic. So I looked at it, 50,000 feet, you know, kind of did a little bit of research at your local construction number. 115 bucks a foot seemed to be a kind of a good number, you know, and then just started going down the list. So, you know, looking here, it looked like it's like just shy of about a $7.5 million project to me, which, you know, kind of passes the smell test. I then kind of went down and said, okay, if I had a loan, if I could get a loan for about 3/4 of it, and then I had to come up with about another $2 million bucks, where would that money come from? Start looking at the historic credit, start looking at the state credit. The historic credit in this month for these pieces, what I did is I assumed that we would go sell them. For the state credit, I assumed that the developer would use them. Market for the state credits are not as broad as the federal, so that's why I assume that. So basically, for the developer, he's kind of creating about $1 million worth of equity between his getting a state credit and then putting other additional cash into it. Kind of went through it, figured a rent, projecting out about 4 or 5 years, figured about 11.5 bucks a foot seemed again past that smell test. And, you know, felt like I could get a return that I could live with for a project like this. So, you know, you see a space, and I don't know where this is, but it had the kind of the same high bay windows that you would see up here. And, you know, I could see, you know, something like this going in here. And again, with the high bay windows. But through that combination, and it might change, it might shift, maybe it's something a little different. But again, for this type of achievable kind of building that was ready to go, felt good, and it felt like it was in a good location in the building, or on the site rather, I'm sorry. So then did the same thing. Again, here's your giant building. This is in building 4. Looked at, you know, indoor fitness, really kind of had the opportunity. Also was thinking, you know, if you paired fitness with wellness, then you've really got a combination of this little model plus the one I just showed you. You know, you've got a medical aspect, and then you've got a sort of a health and wellness piece. This one's a lot harder, I'll tell you. You know, rents are low, like we're talking about $4, and that'd be triple net. So basically, you know, the tenant would be kind of bearing that weight. But really, what it's hard to figure out is that, like, you know, can a facility like this for an operator, because I wouldn't presume that the city would run something like this, you know, can they support a rental burden of about $400,000? I think so, maybe. If you have, I think we've talked about getting three fields plus other facilities in here. But you can see here, my approach was a little bit different. I tried to get, there's less leverage on the loan. So we pushed the loan down. So what that has the ability to do is that makes it easier. The guy has lower monthly payments, right, on the back end. So I don't have to kind of achieve as much. And then, started to create, okay, new market tax credits, I should have mentioned this earlier, really only apply for non-residential projects. So this could be a job generator. They like that. So maybe I can get a new markets and a grant of about, $2.5 million bucks. And then it kind of gets me to something where, if I can find an operator who gets me there, I'm the developer and I'm able to sort of say, okay, I've got this great activity generator. It's bringing other people on traffic and I'm not so worried about my return. Tougher than the first one for sure. But again, it was just as we wanted to go out there and sort of test some of these assumptions, that's kind of the approach that we looked at. So here you start to see, again, I don't even know where's this, well,
That's
doesn't matter.
Chelsea Pier up in Connecticut. It's an old industrial building.
Right.
It's an athletic facility.
So, climbing walls, ball fields, you could have, event space in here. It's a multi-purpose space, and there's a lot of possibilities with such a wide column grid, et cetera. But again, we're going to have to deal with environmental issues, and that also lends itself to not wanting to be residential, which is something we really we steered away from, particularly for this phase. And then more, sort of more kind of projects that, again, in sort of similarly sized, similarly scaled buildings where you see, this kind of aesthetic. This could be, this could be a great office lobby where someone really walks in and just feels like, hey, these folks really spent a lot of time thinking about, keeping the building intact, but, kept it functional, kept it going, kept it interesting, made this something different, made me want to have an office here at Western Electric. Same here, it's great courtyard. I think that's a super image. Food hall, food court, outside seating here, another food hall here, lobby. You get to see these, these enormous columns. So you start to get a flavor. And so when folks like me start to see images like this, and then start to go back to a building like we toured the other day, it's easy to get excited. And it's easy to want to start to figure out what's the path forward. And I think, as you said, it won't be easy. It'll take a lot of effort. It'll take a big team. But I do see a path forward. And I do think that as we approach it incrementally, the momentum builds, and then you'll have more and more opportunities for sort of acceleration as you get deeper and deeper into the project. I think so. And here we go.
Great way to set this up here, yep. And I think what's really important to talk about also is Dominic is the cynic of our group. We, as designers, we're hopelessly optimistic. We always see the powerful, potential of the site. And one of the reasons it's not really important to bring someone like Dominic onto the team here is, no, this is the bare knuckle economic argument. If you can't get a developer to invest in here, it's not going to happen. Well, they said it's going to be tricky, it's going to be tough, but there is a path forward. So what is that path forward? So, in a big picture, be not afraid. This really is, there's a real project here. We're really excited about it, and there's some challenges to it. If this were easy, it would have been done a long time ago. It's going to take a lot of collaboration with a lot of different people, but it is possible. And we've seen projects, we've all worked on projects more complex, more challenging like this, and we all survived. Bite-sized portions. Once again, I think where programs, visionary documents often fail is they look at that 20 years down the line, here's what we have going on. How do we get there though? This incremental approach gives us the ability to walk our way into the site and not be so deeply vested that you can't sort of shift gears along the line. It's got to be comprehensive, and one of the things we talked a little bit about here is it isn't just about the site, it's about how the site interacts with the broader community. And what I'm excited about, a lot of the ideas, one of the reasons we kept talking about the recreational opportunity here, it's a trickier financial argument. But what it does is it creates a great amenity for the community, but also brings the broader community into the site. It sort of demystifies what this area of East Burlington is like, and we see even longer term, it's an economic generator. If you do these athletic facilities right, whether it's, say, indoor soccer or ball fields or ice hockey rinks, whatever, and all of a sudden you start talking about creating tournaments. People come in from around the region. People come from Charlotte. People come from Durham. They spend the night. They need a hotel. They need a place to eat. And all of a sudden, you're actually taking other people's money from outside the area. It's an economic incentive, and it actually supports the area here. While at the same time, you know, weekends, you know, you bring folks in from around the region, but, you know, throughout the week, it's a great local amenity for the people of Burlington. Attention to site control. This is, you know, going back to a lot of points that Chris made, that, you know, we got to figure out, you know, what the ownership structure is, what the opportunities are for public-private partnerships, how everyone can play their role in supporting this broader vision, how one might structure that in a way that allows us to maximize the leverage of all the various assets that we brought to bear on the project. And also, to talk about stakeholder implementation team. Once again, this is going to be from both the owner perspective as well as community perspective. How are we engaging and talking to one another to make sure that as the site is developed, it is supporting the needs of the community and the community is supporting the needs of the ownership. So what are the first steps? This is a big picture. If we take those things under consideration, what can we do tomorrow? What can we do to start this process as we get going? First thing, cut the grass. Make the site presentable. Make sure that when you have, you know, I said you maintain the lawn in front, make sure there's any graffiti, you clean it off. Just in general, buff up the image of what the public sees, which is quite frankly outside the gates. Don't worry about what's behind it for now. Let's just make our front door look pretty. Organize and advocate. You know, this is something that the community, if the community wants this to happen and wants to support it, they're going to be out there giving it their support and also holding folks accountable that as this moves forwards, if you commit to doing something that is actually done. That's a pro-con at this point. That, on one thing, the community has to support it, but once that support is committed, then, you know, elected officials, the nonprofits, the developers have to follow through. And if they don't follow through, the community needs to step up and note that that has not occurred. After we get that started, use the front lawn, the parking area for a farmer's market, a maker's market on a weekend. You know, once again, you don't have to open the site up yet, but on a nice little green strip in front there, you know, clean up the building 1A, that sort of 1970s building there, and just have farm stands up there. You know, we have, I think it's Tuesday or Wednesday, there's a farmer's market around the corner, but same thing on Saturday, have a farmer's market there, and quite frankly, you'll probably get some broader traffic from outside the immediate community because farmers markets are quaint, you get the makers there, and it's sort of a great way to spend a weekend. You come in just to check it out because it's an authentic experience. Start a friends organization, do an oral history. One of the things we have to recognize is there's a great resonance with the community about this site, but it's been shuttered for 30 years. The folks who worked here, the folks who have the stories about what happened here are all getting on in years. It's great to capture that history, that, you know, what happened here, tell us stories about when you worked here. It's a great local history component. It's also great actually for us to know what happened where. So as Chris already, you know, got the one guy and said, oh, this is where we did the degreasing. Well, that's great to know. The only way you know that is by talking to people who are actually there. But once again, it also helps you ground the authenticity of the project here. Let's develop a quality of life plan for the neighborhoods in the vicinity of the project. Once again, how do we create that greater connectivity? How do you start talking about connecting up to the greenway? How do you start talking how the site can support the community as much as the community can support the site? Moving on, let's talk about some of the crime and safety concerns along the Church Street corridor. And beyond that, let's talk about the Church Street corridor in general. Right now, as I said in my remarks on Wednesday, Church Street is really good at getting you out of town. But it's not a particularly pleasant way to get out of town. What about having sidewalks on both sides of the street? What about some tree planting? What about, you know, creating those moments of relief as you're working your way down Church Street to connect downtown with the site? Develop temporary art gallery installations. You know, once again, in the back building or it's in the ground floor of building 1A right there, but give you an opportunity to clean up just a little bit of the site and make it accessible to the public so people start getting used to going there. And you can do an installation that doesn't take a lot of effort, doesn't take a lot of money. Artists love, you know, discounted space. just to allow them to present their work, and it's a reason to visit the site again, get used to the idea that it's a really cool place the public wants to be. Clean up the plaza for events use. Once again, for all those you went and came and visited on Wednesday, either in the morning or in the evening, it's a pretty cool space here. One of the things that we were sharing is an image amongst ourselves on the design team is there's a vision of the Renaissance ideal city, and it's a sort of this, it was the early development of perspective and these sort of Euclidean forms, these perfect platonic forms, and we realized that the scale and proportions of that South Plaza area looks like a Renaissance painting. The sort of the size, the scale, the height, the way all the perspective lines lead to a certain point. It's actually a very pleasant place to stand in. When you go to the North Plaza, same thing. It's a bigger scale, but with the objects and elements that are in there, you don't feel like you're standing in the middle of a large concrete plane. There's lots of little bits and pieces and interesting things to look at that is, weirdly enough, for a 22-acre site with 800,000 square feet of space, it's human scaled, and that's pretty neat. So how can we clean these sites up? And before all the buildings are ready to be renovated, accessing the public components of it, basically clean up the outside of the buildings enough so that they're not hazardous and they look okay, and then just occupy, the public plazas. And before making permanent structures, have a music festival there, bring food trucks in. Everything's paved. At least get people out there and enjoying the experience and kind of reveling in what a neat place this is. And then at that point, outdoor family movies, gather people there, project a movie up on one of the buildings or bring one of the big blow-up screens in there. But once again, give people a reason to gather on the site while we're getting ready to actually start doing the interior renovations. Public arts, people love that, and the ability to come out and just sort of very loosely and lightly make some installations, talk about the history, encourage local artists to maybe do some site-specific installations about this. And once again, break down the current barrier between the outside and the inside, bring people onto the site is what I think is the most important part. All of this, by the way, does not really involve renovating a building. This is all just loose, light, tactical insertions that get people onto the site and appreciating and understanding the site. And while we're at it, we got a big billboard up here. Let's talk about the Cold War history here. Let's put a giant missile on the side of the building and talk about that. That's easy art. Or, once again, this is Nike One right now, commencing a whole series of photo murals about, the life and history of the people who worked on the site here. Before you occupy it, activate it. So you can be, walking along, having events on the outside there, and rather than looking at a big, dumb, blank wall, you've got something to activate it and make it a really cool spot to be. A couple key points here. The project website, hosted by the city, is right here. You can go find that there. And the presentation you've just seen here will be posted sooner than later. So with that, I thank you all for coming out. And I see Peter coming to the front, which tells me we're out of time.
We are. I know everybody, it is a Friday night, and of course this is the best place to be on this Friday night. So thank you for spending your evening with us. A few more thank yous. Thank you to Miss Lori and ABSS for allowing us to use the boardroom here in the facility, so thank you to you. Our thank you to Morgan and Blake and the rest of the city staff who have been very involved in this process throughout. So quick round of applause for our city staff. And then really the stars of the show, folks, are the S.D.A.T team members and the AIA staff. So if y'all would just stand up for a moment and take a round of applause. Come on.
But it seems like if that was something, if we had a hotel close to a baseball,